Hello there and welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about the different types of Wicca, and this feels significant to me because there are different paths that I think a lot of people don't recognize, a lot of people aren't aware of. This may be especially significant for you if you're looking for a coven, if you're looking for a particular path, then realizing what is out there may be a little bit helpful for you, and realizing that there are different options available to you. And so especially if you have found yourself down a Wiccan path before and you have decided that maybe this isn't for you, there are other options that aren't just solitary practice, if solitary practice isn't what you're looking for. Now for a lot of these, they're going to be generally found in a coven type atmosphere. Some of them may be a lot more difficult to join than others just because of the secrecy around them. But if one of these seems to resonate with you and you really want to be in a coven atmosphere, then I hope this is helpful for you. If you're just here out of curiosity, welcome. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you are enjoying this kind of content. It really helps support my channel. Now, of course, I do want to acknowledge, while we get started here, that Wicca is a modern form of paganism. It really started to gain traction in the 1960s by Gerald Gardner. And it's in the 1970s that we start to see a little bit of a deviation. There starts to be new forms of paganism coming out of people who were originally initiated into Gardnerian Wicca and initiated into a coven with Gerald Gardner. As with anything, things continue to change and become more modern and continue to branch from there. And so within this practice, there are many different types of Wicca. I am going to cover some of the more core and foundational traditions of Wicca. However, I am absolutely going to miss some of the more recent and modern, some of the forms of Wicca that have melded themselves as a combination of different types, whether that's some of the ones I'm listing here or ones that I haven't mentioned. I will not be able to cover all of them. The list is just so massive, but in an attempt to give you the best information, I have consolidated that down to about 6 different types, but absolutely there are more than just these options. Now, to start out with our foundation, we have Gardnerian Wicca, created by, of course, Gerald Gardner. This form of Wicca is really centered around 2 main deities, being the horned god and the mother goddess. Because Gerald Gardner was an enthusiastic nudist, there are some traditions here that tend to do ritual sky-clad, that is, without clothing, but Gardnerian covens are very secretive, so the information that you can find outside of the coven is almost non-existent. And my own knowledge of this is limited, so I will only give you some of the things that I was able to find, which is that the covens tend to have 13 members, and you must be initiated by another member. There is definitely a hierarchy system, and the secrecy, I'm sure, can make it difficult if you are trying to find a coven or if you are trying to gain more information and see if it's right for you. So this one is probably one of the more difficult ones to join as an outsider, and especially difficult for people who are just curious and want to learn more. But the basis of having 1 female deity and 1 male deity is influential and representational for other types of Wicca, especially when you get into the more eclectic side, where it's not necessarily representing any longer an individual god or goddess, such as the horned god and mother goddess. It can now represent more of a divine feminine and divine masculine. Alexandrian Wicca stems off from here with Alexander and his wife Maxine. The name of Alexandrian Wicca, of course, is inspired by the creator's name, but also the Library of Alexandria is inspiration as well, which of course was filled with occult knowledge. But here is where the deities start to differ, because in Alexandrian Wicca, this includes the Oak King and the Holly King as your male deities, and the goddess. However, the Oak King and the Holly King are in a constant cycle of battle, death, and rebirth. And this also really focuses on the cycle of the seasons. And with these cycles, it does help to imagine the Oak King as the more summery energies, while the Holly King represents more of the winter energies. This Wiccan tradition tends to have more of a ritualistic clothing option, and it is not as secretive as Gardnerian Wicca. Dianic Wicca, as far as I can tell, would have originated in the United States rather than over in the UK like the other types of Wicca. And there are a few different types of this as well. I'm first going to talk about the originating tradition created by, gosh, I really hope I don't butcher the name, Zuzana Budapest, who created it in the 1970s. This is a tradition that focuses solely on the goddess. It is a bit more of a feminine and feminist movement. This type of Dianic Wicca, or form of Dianic Wicca inspired by Budapest, has been a tradition that encourages female initiates, but doesn't generally have males. And this is with the intention of creating a very harmonious and safe space for these women. But of course, this doesn't speak for Dianic Wicca as a whole, because there are other versions that branched off from here, including the tradition by Morgan McFarland, which may allow men. Seax Wicca, which has been created by Raymond Buckland. And this really draws influence from Anglo-Saxon witchcraft and Germanic traditions. So in this case, it may be often, but not exclusively, Odin and Freya as a representation of the god and goddess. This is a tradition that really focuses on herbalism and divination, especially the runes and tarot. This tradition does not have an oath of secrecy, and new material is definitely welcomed. There is no specific Book of Shadows. And I was actually very interested in finding that this is also a tradition that has very open rituals. This also does not have degrees of advancement or necessarily a hierarchy, because the leaders are typically elected democratically. And while they are in a position to lead, that would be during a 13 full moon cycle period, or about 1 year. This is also not a tradition that has a heavy focus on lineage. There is also Celtic and Druidic Wicca, which I want to acknowledge here are technically two different types of Wiccan practices. But considering some of the overlap here, I have decided to talk about them together because they tend to share some of the same beliefs. This type of Wicca is especially inspired by Celtic mythology, and this is relevant in regard to Druidic Wicca as well because of its oral tradition for the Druids historically hasn't left us with a lot of source material. So this practice takes on the inspiration from what we do have in a more modern and intuitive form for practices today. And these traditions may also use Ogham, which is a Celtic writing system that had a similar function to runes from Norse paganism. And this is where you start to see some of the Celtic influence, because of course Wicca in general has a lot of Celtic influences, especially for the major holidays, and specifically what they share between Celtic and Druidic Wicca is going to be the belief that nature is inherently divine and that it is also connected. And so it seems to have more of a animistic concept than traditional Wicca does. And lastly, we have solitary and eclectic Wicca. Now this as well, technically two different types of Wicca. However, because of their overlap and what they have in common, for example, typically the solitary Wiccan is going to also be eclectic. And typically the eclectic witch prefers to work in a solitary fashion. This is not exclusive, but I have decided to put these two together. But of course, in a more solitary practice, you are not looking for a coven atmosphere. You like being able to work on your own. Both of these tend to have more of a patchwork kind of foundation, a patchwork kind of belief. It is not entirely structured on what you can and cannot do, because the eclectic witch finds what works for them and especially finds what is consistent. I think that a solitary practice is one of the easiest ways to learn, because it allows you to look into these different types of Wicca, and it also allows you to look into different forms of paganism if you are interested in that as well. And there are definitely a lot of people who believe themselves to be on one path of Wicca, find themselves moving to a different path of Wicca, and maybe you find yourself moving from Wicca to something else, or something else to Wicca. That doesn't make your practice and your belief any less valid. I think it is important to research and try to learn what is out there, as long as it's being approached in a very, very open-minded and loving way. I hope this has been helpful to you if you're looking for a particular type of Wicca, or if you're just trying to learn about what's even out there. As with anything, please do your research, and do keep in mind, of course, in the attempt to try to bring you some of this information, I have had to generalize some traditions of Wicca. This does not mean that this blanketly describes these type of people, because of course, even within these communities and within these traditions, these practices may be different from coven to coven. And I do want to acknowledge that for sure. Because the beliefs and practices of each coven are very, very individual, I could not possibly hope to describe them all within just a few words. Please be mindful that my descriptions are not all they are, only a launching point for you to begin your own research if you would like to delve further into some of these traditions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!